Trans-Pacific Partnership. It may not have achieved everything that we dreamed of, but no trade agreement does. It is, in my view, in the best interest of the United States. And I don't just say that for the mercantile interests that we have of trying to sell more, whether it be services or product, but we know from our history that by opening markets and lowering the trade barriers, that it raises the GDP of our nation substantially. $1 trillion since World War II, since we started the GATT. So that in itself is valuable, particularly as we are a nation with relatively low restrictions and the rest of the world is somewhat higher. And indeed, the members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership have higher restrictions. But also in the areas of security, we've found over the years with trade that the opening of markets and getting businesses, whether they be small and medium-sized or big corporations, to be doing business abroad creates strength in alliance. And the governments can say this is an ally, but unless there are relationships that are built. You may recall that in the late 80s, we were very angry with Japan. But you look back in the years since, and Toyota's come and invested here, paid tax revenues, hired employees. You don't hear anything about being cross with Japan. Has become one of our closest allies. And that's what the commercial interactions accomplish. But it's not just for rich nations, Europe, Japan, but also for developing countries. You know, if we restrict products that developing countries can sell, whether it be cotton or agriculture, where they make their living off the soil, we are inhibiting development. And opening up our markets is the cheapest form of development we can have. So trade is good in general. It is very, I think, positive with respect to reaching across the Pacific. I personally think that it could be a wonderful first step in creating open trade throughout the Asia-Pacific region. And I do believe that China should join. There's quite a list of those interested: Indonesia, Taiwan, Philippines, South Korea. But China should be right at the head of the list because the two largest economies need to be joined in a trade agreement. If they're not, there's going to be trade diversion, and that will fuel economic friction, which will create security risks. So it's in both of our interests to open our markets. And I hope we can get that done. I hope Congress sees the benefits and moves forward on approving the agreement. I hope members really look at the agreement. I have. And you know, the labor provisions are quite strong. It provides an enforcement mechanism for the rules that the International Labor Organization has laid down. Minimum wages, proper treatment of workers, ability to associate, and similarly so on the environmental rules. Here we're spending time in Paris saying what we ought to do, and this agreement specifies some things that we must do. Both labor and environment have enforcement mechanisms. First agreement to have the strength of the enforcement that we've been able to negotiate. So I think that those who care about those two issues, and of course there are 30 chapters, so there are lots of other issues, should really take heart and raise their hand when they're asked to vote, and vote in favor. I very much do support Trade Promotion Authority. You know, we're a divided government. The Congress has the right to levy taxes and to apply duties to deal with the commercial aspects of our nation. The President has the obligation to negotiate with foreign governments, to form treaties. if we did not have a partnership between Congress and the President, we wouldn't be able to have trade agreements that have opened our markets and added $1 trillion worth of goods to our GDP. So the fact of the matter is that we need Trade Promotion Authority. We've had it since 1934. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the first president who granted it. It's been re-granted, if you will, 18 times. I could not have negotiated the agreements that we negotiated without having the assurance that Congress was going to look at the agreement and either vote for it or against it. It's not a vote for, it's a vote just to look at the whole agreement and say yes or no. Because if you start amending it with 535 people, you are going to lose your agreement. It will unravel. So we need it in order to have market opening agreements that have meant so much to our nation's growth and prosperity and security and contributed to the development of other nations. It's better if Congress does not hang a bunch of conditions on the what we used to call fast track or Trade Promotion Authority. It's better if the authority to negotiate is granted before you even sit down at the table. The reason being that the other side will feel more comfortable that if they deal with their tough political issues, there is a likelihood that they'll get a benefit of an agreement. And so I do worry that when you don't get Trade Promotion Authority up front, and where there are lots of conditions, you impede the negotiation, so you may not get quite as good agreement as you would if you worked with Congress. So many years ago, we spent a lot of time with Congress, keeping them briefed and apprised of where we were and where we wanted to go. And oftentimes we had to confess that there were trade-offs, but in most districts, what you don't get on one side, in one sector, you can get a great deal on another, and so there is a general benefit. I think that the Trans-Pacific Partnership will be of great benefits to the poorer countries of the 12 that we're negotiating. Look at Malaysia. There are rules there that will change the economy there in a positive way. Look at Vietnam, a communist country that limited itself because it relies upon state-owned enterprises rather than permitting the small and medium-sized businesses to blossom. This will make a tremendous difference that, to their people. And as they grow, you know, it benefits the United States. Some people say, oh my, they're going to be our competitors. I say, no, they're going to be your future customers. You remember after World War II, when the devastation occurred in Europe and we created the Marshall Plan, we were very generous and we opened up the markets. But what happened? Europe as a whole today is our largest export market. So it's important that we create our future customers by bringing along the developing world. I'm not worried about Iran's nuclear production for energy purposes. I don't think it's going to have a huge dent in future energy prices. There are lots of things you can say about the agreement with Iran. It's the question always with striking an agreement with a country is what are the alternatives? And if they were to produce, as all indications were, that they were going to do whatever they were going to do anyway, and also create weaponry, better that we have a period of time to try to limit that. So I think that the agreement is in the best interest of our nation. I would certainly favor limiting that ban. That ban was put in place when we had an oil crisis. We didn't have enough energy, and we wanted to keep it for our homes and our businesses. But today, it is one of the things we want to sell. We can talk about the developing world. They're better off in using U.S. produced and refined energy instead of burning coal that is cheaper and dirty. So here we are in Paris trying to develop a code of ethics to deal with energy, which is a very serious issue. I think all future issues are tough for most populations to say, we got to deal with it. But we know that we could change the planet, and a lot of people could die. A lot of places where they live won't be. A lot of food production would be diminished or eradicated. So let's work together. And I think the limitation on exporting U.S. crude has outlived its time. If they're tightened too much, it will have a detrimental effect, in my view. We have lots of corporations who have invested here from Europe, and they create tax revenues for their states and locals. They hire Americans, and we're so happy to have them. And if their travel is limited and it takes more time, they'll come less often and perhaps choose to go to Canada or some other place. So we have to watch it carefully. There are many ways, and I'm not a securities expert, of how we have to look at people who come here who could do us harm. But to have across the board limitation on all of Europe and destroy the waiver program that has brought a lot of applause with our closest ally is problematic. And we ought to give deeper thought in what are the alternatives and sit with our security experts as to the best way to move forward to protect America. There are many things that we ought to do that would enhance our leadership. I would recommend that we start with what we need to do here at home. I travel a great deal, and 10 years ago, it was often said to me, we want to be more like the United States. We want a strong financial system and a reliable, strong governance system. Now when I travel, some of those same people say to me, oh my, we couldn't be like the United States. We couldn't drift and not have a budget. We couldn't manage with a tax system that the World Bank puts down as 60th or 70th in evaluating the world's ease of filing taxes or getting a permit. You have really declined, they say to me. And so I think that we need to get that fixed, which would also help our economic standing. And the stronger we are economically, not by being bossy, but by being good. If we had a streamlined economy that worked well, governance system that worked well, we wouldn't have to lecture other governments about what they should do. They would want to be like us, and it used to be that way. And I think that we have forfeited something that our forebears created, and now we seem to be finding it more expedient to quarrel with one another, to fail to find ways to do the right thing, even though it isn't 100% of what we want. And that worries me a lot. I think that really does cost us leadership. What we do here at home is seen on television everywhere in the world. And with those that we most want to change, who don't believe in capitalism and don't believe in democracy, they're the first to say, we can't be like you. Try to remedy the mechanism where congressional districts are drawn to provide safety in collusion, gerrymandering. Having served in government, where you walk into a room and talk to a diverse group of people, you not only learn from listening, but it makes you try to take into consideration diverse views. That's done too little, perhaps, today. And it seems that both parties are almost a duopoly, that they are speaking to the fringes, left and right, where the money lies. And it's a deal that they can make. Some get a square district, some get a triangle, some get a long piece of yarn district. And it's not rational. That would help, because if your election depends upon a cross-section of Americans voting for you instead of a club or a monopolistic regime backing you, it would be better for the country, in my own personal view.